Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming back to the T.R.O.N podcast. This is your host, Rashad Woods. Special guest today who does great works. He's been very involved when it comes to his community and teaching people to be better versions of themselves through his nonprofit work, as well as being a professor. Thank you very much, Mr. Michael Berry.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Rashad.
You have a very interesting background. You came from carpentry and construction work, and then you became an executive, and then you made a career pivot later on in life. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, my dad was into construction also, so it was pretty much a natural thing for me to go into it. I tried to go to college right after high school, but it didn't work out too good. I joke around that it was like a 5-week plan, and I was often working for a while. About 5 years later, I went back to school at night while I was a carpenter and got an undergraduate degree. By the time I finished with that, I had 2 kids. So I stayed in construction with the degree, and I eventually I wanted to be a teacher, but I ended up staying in construction and was blessed with being a manager, and then got some executive positions, and then started a firm. So yeah, and when I turned 53, I decided I wanted to continue to pursue what I was interested in. What I first went back to school for after 5 years of being out of high school was I wanted to
Right.
teach. I wanted to teach about faith, and I was very much interested in history, so I got a graduate degree in early church history and theology. And after I finished that, I was really hungry to learn more, so I got another graduate degree, a master's degree in biblical studies. And yeah, so that's how I made the pivot. And
it's wonderful. I was just say you're a professor now too.
yeah, I tell the kids don't call me professor because that's like an official title for professors. But they call it an adjunct professor. I teach 2 classes a week during the day to students, and I absolutely love it. I mean, I just love the kids. It's a fascinating class. I teach a world religion class, which is interesting. I've learned a lot from. So I probably learned more than I.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I apologize for cutting you off. That looking up religion is so fascinating to me.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a little different, but I do love the kids, and I'm very interested in a world religion. And for the second master's that I did, I wrote a thesis on hell and the savior of the world, it was called. And that's what I was really ended up being interested in. I got interested about the afterlife. So I've learned a lot about how other faiths view the afterlife too, since I've been a world religion teacher. And it's been very fascinating. The whole transition's been great.
Now, have you traveled to places to look at, because I get fascinated by things like this, because when they go to historical sites of where things have occurred, whether they go to, Egypt, Jordan, Israel, places where all of these massive religious events have taken place. Have you had a chance to travel to any of these locations?
No, I've always wanted to go to Israel. I just haven't made it over there. I've been to Italy. I went to Rome and saw the Vatican and all that. That was fascinating. So that part of it historically. And then also being a construction person, I was, just blown away by the way they built buildings back then. And just the old churches was really fascinating. But I haven't made it to Israel yet. And I'm half Arabic, so I'm Syrian and Lebanese. And I haven't made it there. I wanted to go there also. Given all the problems now, who knows when I'll be able to go there.
Understood. When you say that other religions view the afterlife, can you go a little deeper into that as to what each religion would view the afterlife in your research and understanding?
Well, I guess the Eastern religions are probably the most fascinating. You got probably 1.6 billion people between Hindus and Buddhists. And Hindus are about 1.1 billion, and they believe in many, many gods, right? And they believe that there's something called samsara. It's kind of a circle of reincarnation that you keep being reincarnated over and over until you exit that system and achieve moksha, you do that by your good karma would finally outweigh your bad karma, and you'd be drawn back to the Brahman, which is the source of all. That's Hinduism. In Buddhism, it's not so much going back to God. It's not going back to God at all. It's really just reaching personal enlightenment, reaching nirvana. That's about a half a billion people. But it's interesting, both of them in the cycle of reincarnation, they have a place that I guess you could call in English, it would be hell. There's a God, not the God, but a God. And Buddhists believe in gods, but they just don't believe in one overall God. Most Buddhists don't.
Right.
He reigns in a place called Naraka, or
Okay.
Narkiar. I don't know exactly how to say it, but he reigns there, and people are punished for their bad deeds in this life before they're reincarnated. So it's kind of an in between punishment, and there's a
Okay.
various ways they're punished, and so that they subconsciously remember it, so they don't do it again in the next life.
That's
So
fascinating.
that's yeah, it is. It's interesting.
That's really fascinating.
But for them, Naraka or Nakia, I forgot how to say it. It's not an eternal condition. It's just an in between, kind of like a way to teach you a lesson for all the wrongs you've done until you can get off the wheel of samsara. We'll
Right.
call it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Now, do they have like the equivalent of a Bible in in those religions? Is there some sort of book, or is it more oral?
yeah. No, nope. They all have holy books, and there's a plethora of them.
Okay.
There's nothing really and the thing that's interesting about Hinduism, there's so many gods that it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what Hinduism is and
Right.
Buddhism is, other than it's really focused on reincarnation and that this life is a delusion, and to really see things clearly in one of the religions, Hinduism, it's to make it back to the Brahman, and
Okay.
in Buddhism it's just to reach personal enlightenment.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, it's very different
Oh, no
than
question.
the
No question.
Abrahamic religions, Judaism and Islam and Christianity, much different.
Correct.
The
I
one
always
true
found it
God.
fascinating. These interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that most Christians, if they knew more about world religions, their view of Christianity and Jesus of Nazareth would be a little bit different, because there's so many people out there made in the image and likeness of God that are trying to do something to make it right, right? They know that there's
Mhm.
right and wrong, and they try
Right.
not to do the wrong. So, yeah, it's fascinating just how many people are in the world and how many are struggling and they're in strife. Like in Hinduism, there's 1.1 billion Hindus in the world, and about 200,000 of them are outside the caste system totally, which is a hierarchy of
Right.
social status. And they're there because of the religion of Hinduism. It has to do with whatever they did in their previous life, where they are now, to try to
Oh wow.
reach moksha. And there's
Okay.
200 million that aren't even in a caste. They don't even make it into a caste. So there's about 335 million people in the United States. 200 million are casteless in India. They're in abject poverty. I don't
Okay.
know if you've ever seen the slums of India. They're amazingly dense, and we think that we have problems with homeless here. It's just unbelievable in India. Mumbai
Well,
has,
the population is
sorry,
staggering. The population
it
level
is.
alone is just it's stag. It's
Yeah.
just an amazing amount of people in
It
a very
is.
concentrated
They
area.
they surpassed China. So there's 1.4 billion people just in India. There's
Wow.
1.4 billion in China also, but there's just a
Right.
little bit more of 1.4 in India now. It's amazing.
So, how does someone who comes from your background approach another religion's beliefs? I mean, I know religion is very, very dicey topic. Is it more just from an understanding standpoint? Is it like curiosity? Now, how does
Yeah.
that whole go? How does that come across?
Well, I'm a convicted believer in Jesus of Nazareth.
Right.
I
Right.
think he's the way, the truth, and the light. He's the fullness of any approach to trying to reach God. And so that's my compass, is Jesus of Nazareth. That's my standard of religion. A God that would leave heaven to rescue his creation that in some way got broken along the way. I in no way believe that I'm reborn to someone else, that my consciousness goes to another soul. I
Yeah.
believe that we live in a broken world. I am who I am, and someday I'll be made right with God in the afterlife. So, but I try to approach all those other religions with some humility, understanding
Right.
that some of them have never been exposed to Christianity or Jesus of Nazareth or a Bible. Or when they have been exposed to it, it's been extremely negative by people that are saying that they're a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, but may not be conveying in a way that is anything that they would want to be associated with. So I think I come from a place that everyone is made in the image and likeness of God, and in some way, God is going to make everything right at some point. I don't believe necessarily in universal salvation, but I do believe that everyone gets a chance, and how God administers justice in the afterlife is just way too big for us, someone like me to kind of try to guess at. So I don't try to
Well, that
guess at. what happens in the afterlife. The book I wrote, Hell is a Bad Word, a place of never-ending punishment that Jesus of Nazareth never spoke of, really
I saw
delves
you
into
mention
the
that.
specific. Yeah, it delves into the specifics of what he actually said and how it was interpreted, or how it's been interpreted as a place of never-ending punishment. So I go through those things and found that fascinating. So that's probably been the most fascinating part of my life is really researching that.
How does Yeah, and I was looking at on your website, it said only 4 of 27 New Testament documents use the two words associated with hell, right? And so,
Yeah.
you know, obviously you would know that more than I would. How do you think the forefront of damnation took the forefront of a lot of conversations for deeds that we do while we are alive? Like, how did that become to be?
I think at some point, it really is a turning point in church history, according to a lot of scholars. It has to do with Augustine of Hippo. He's a 4th century scholar. He was a priest. He became a bishop, and he was very influential in the early church. But before Augustine, the verses that contained what is written down as the English word hell, when the Bible's finally translated to English 1,500 years after Jesus of Nazareth was crucified and resurrected from the dead. Those words back then were seen by a lot of scholars as having to do with purification. One of the ones that is translated as hell is a valley on the outskirts of Jerusalem. It's called Gehenna. And that's still
Okay.
translated as hell in some Bibles. An interesting statistic is that in the first Catholic Bible, the word hell appeared 109 times. In the Bible that's used every day of the week, 7 days a week, 365 days a year in the Catholic Church today, does not include the word hell. It's been decided that the word has been misused. It's been a mistranslation of 4 other words. So it doesn't appear that way in Catholic Bibles. And it's not just like that in Catholicism. The King James Version has the word hell 58 times, and the New International Version and the New American Standard Version has it 13 times. And those 13 times in both of those refer to a valley south and west of the city of Jerusalem, called Gehenna. So
Okay.
the theology of the time, whether it's Catholic or Protestant, when the first Bibles came out, was that there is a place in the afterlife where God burns people eternally for their sins. When I researched it, the verses that contain those words don't really bear that out as far as I'm concerned. And there's a lot of that goes behind explaining that, because it's such a position that's outside the norm for Christianity. But basically, Christianity took on some of the forms of the afterlife punishment that came from other religions like Buddhism
Mhm.
and Hinduism, and also
Right.
something called Zoroastrianism, which was practiced by the Persian Empire. A very dualistic
Really?
religion that has a good God and a bad God, and the bad God presided over a place of fire. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's interesting. A lot of words in the Bible that were translated to hell,
Wow. Because
they just
for
don't.
so many times, I mean, it's the classic good versus evil. Do this, certain things are happening for you in the afterlife. Things, if you don't, X, Y, Z are the consequences for it. So subsequently, and this is my own personal curiosity, if there's a dispute about whether hell is what it is there definitively then a heaven?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Jesus didn't talk that much about heaven either. So there's not a lot about heaven and hell. Jesus of Nazareth was more concerned about loving God and loving neighbor.
Right.
That was the greatest commandment, the Shema. Hear, O
Uh-huh.
Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. And you, Israel, should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. He was basically concerned with that. And Leviticus, which is love your neighbor as yourself, that's really what he was
Mhm.
concerned with. That's what the parable of the Good Samaritan is all about. And
Right.
um, that's really, Jesus was concerned what happened in the here and now. Now, he did talk about the afterlife, but it's really
Mhm.
not the focus of his ministry. It has much to do with what happens here. And that's Judaism. That's
Mhm.
not anything different. He was a Jew.
Right. It is the prevailing notion, is so this is what your interpretation. I'm not in any way coming, this is I'm just listening.
Mhm.
Is that a
Yeah.
prevailing notion of what you have? How has that message been received based on what you've researched? Has it come across to anybody else as similar? Said this is the same point of view when you've talked to other people in religion, in
Yeah,
particular followers of Jesus? or what's
That,
the reaction and response been?
that's a great question. So it's definitely outside the mainstream of Christianity, whether it be Catholic or
Right.
Protestant. No doubt
Correct.
about that. But the thesis that I wrote for my second master's at PC, I graduated with distinction. So I made theological
Wow.
points that were correct in some way. I certainly interpreted the scriptures in a way that was logical, or they wouldn't have accepted the thesis.
Correct.
So I think the answer to that is, yeah, there's a lot of other scholars, great scholars, that are much smarter than I ever thought of being, ever
Right.
even dreamed of being,
Right.
that think this way. There's David Bentley Hott, there's Alara Romelli, and then in the Catholic Church, my own faith, there's a guy called Hans von Balthasar, and he asserts that we can hope that eventually everyone will be saved.
Hmm.
That's not the genesis of my book. I'm sorry, the thesis of my book. The thesis of my book is that it's really not conclusive that Jesus ever even talked about a place where you go to in the afterlife, that God's mercy expires, that God no longer cares about anyone. It's really not
Okay.
definitively taught by him. It's
Right.
interpreted that way. And if you read some of the verses, you can understand it. You say, well, what is he talking about then? And then the more you look into it, you look into those verses, the more you can see is that it doesn't make sense that he would be talking about an afterlife place of torture for someone who's maybe not baptized at all, or someone who hasn't professed their faith in Jesus and been born again,
Right.
right? Professing their faith in him as personal Savior and Lord, which I've done,
Right.
and I'm baptized. But I certainly don't think all Hindus, all Buddhists, all Muslims are going to a place of never-ending punishment because Jesus is the way, the truth, and the light, and they don't believe that. I in
Right.
no way think that they're going to everlasting torment for
Right.
that. How that gets adjudicated in the afterlife, and I do believe he is the way, the truth, and the light, but I'm not sure exactly what that means, other than it's the fullness of, I think, how God communicates himself to the world through self-giving love, so great that he laid down his life for his
Right.
creatures. Can't
Well,
explain that.
I just think like this is the reason why I did a show like this, was to be able to talk to people like you, because even in my limit, I know enough a little bit about religion to where I can navigate the nuances. I mean, anybody who
Yeah,
somewhat, whether it's Google, whether they've brought to church as a kid, whether they've gone to a place of worship at any point in their life, the basics to get down to the very, very
yeah,
grains of sand of it all, and to it's a long lasting wormhole of knowledge,
it is.
because
It is.
it really is.
It's
You know.
hard. It's hard to navigate through. Christianity is supposed to be good news, right?
Mhm.
The word gospel means good news. And the way it was used in the first century was when a king made sure that you weren't going to go into bondage, into slavery, and be conquered and have everything taken from you. So I'm not sure in what way it can be good news that everyone besides just a chosen few is going to burn in fire for forever in the afterlife. I think it's much better news that God has made a way through the cross for his creatures to find their way back to him. How he
Right.
does that and how that becomes fair, I think I'll leave to him. I'll just try to follow the teachings of his son, my life, do the best that I can, and leave the justice to him, right?
Right.
Focus on
Right.
loving God and loving neighbor.
How does your nonprofit 535 go? I think that's a very great work that you do, and I'd love to get a chance to speak you.
Well, what we do is every single week we make lunches, bagged lunches for the homeless. Some we deliver directly to
Wonderful.
the street, and others we deliver to homeless shelters in Providence, Rhode Island, right next door to us here.
Hmm.
Besides that, we also once a month we bring clothes to the shelter and we pass them out to the guys, try to get to know them. We also preside over a service once a month before they eat dinner, and we just
Yeah,
tell them a little bit about Jesus of Nazareth and the gospel, and try to pass out something at that time too to them.
that's fantastic.
Besides those things, that the rest of ours is really Thanksgiving and Christmas. We do Thanksgiving dinners. We pass out on the street. We coordinate with a couple of local churches.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah, we also do presents at Christmas time for the homeless. We deliver poinsettias to
That's wonderful work.
the elderly and bring them an excerpt of Luke's
Hmm.
gospel about, the infancy narrative of Jesus. We try to keep Christ in Christmas. So that's what we do, and it's growing. It's getting much bigger and much better every year. So touch more people every year. Try to focus on that
I
part
could
of
pick your
Jesus's
brain about the
ministry.
right,
Say
right.
that
And
again.
I
You
could pick your
little
brain about.
delay.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I just said I could pick your brain all day about your research and the things that because I'm the kind of person that I would watch a documentary on the things that you went to school about, because you'll be like, how did things formulate from this area of the world and then spread amongst the rest of the world, and then also how did this other portion of the world get to this belief system? And
Yeah,
it is the biggest wormhole that you can go down, and it's a lot of conflicting information, and you'll find
it
a lot of
is.
overlaps. And it's just hearing you talk about it is very, very fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, my anchor is, the teachings of Jesus to love God and love neighbor. And he says he gives a new commandment to love one another as I have loved you. So how did he love the world, or how did he love his disciples? He laid his life down for them. I think that
Mhm.
if the world's religions, specifically the Abrahamic religions, focused on that more than, whose piece of land this is and whose piece of land that is, there'd be peace in the Middle East. I think it's a big problem that we don't listen to the teaching of Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah, it's a complicated ordeal over there, that's for sure.
It is,
Um,
yeah,
how
very
does
complicated.
so yeah, obviously you're doing great work, and the things that you do are very, not only fantastic, very self-fulfilling for you, but how can people find you just for the basis of this show?
How can they what? I'm sorry,
How
Rashid,
could
I
they
didn't.
find you, like Michael Berry? How would they be able to, obviously, you don't need me to spread what you do, but just for the people who will be on the show listening, how would they find out in Rhode Island what you do?
They could go to 535.org is probably the best place. That's where the website is for the nonprofit. And the thing that's interesting about it, Rashid, is that we don't make all the lunches. A bunch of different people make them. So a family or a couple of people or one person will take it. So we try to make it so that 52 weeks a year, it's spread around about a lot through a lot of different people. Like, we've had a
Nice.
law firm do it a couple of times. A guy who owns a bunch of Dunkin' Donut franchises, his employees have done it.
Okay.
So a lot of different people do it, and what it is, it gives them a chance to see their neighbor in a homeless person. And so I think
Right.
that's one of the
Right.
wonderful things about 53.5 is that we live in such a rich country. We often don't know the best way we can help the homeless or the inner city poor. And they're right there, ready to help. We're too busy worried about politically which side is winning rather than, yeah, there's homeless people, there's inner city poor, the working poor that just need help. And so this gives an opportunity with the homeless part of it to do that. And then at Christmas and Thanksgiving, we get to help out homeless inner city families. We also have an
Right.
essay
Right.
contest at a couple of schools where
Nice.
we ask a theological question and we give them some scholarship money. So it's trying
Nice.
to invest in the inner city poor,
Wonderful.
and
Wonderful
our
work.
neighbor is
Wonderful work.
in need here. So yeah.
How did you pick the name?
It comes from a verse in the Old Testament in Isaiah. It has to
Okay.
do with the suffering servant, someone that God chooses to suffer for the sins of Christians interpreted as the sins of the world. So he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquity. Upon him was a chastisement that makes us whole, and by his stripes we're healed. So we think it prophesies about the coming of a suffering servant who comes to save his people. So we
That's
picked
deep.
that because out of gratitude for that, and
Okay.
recognition that God is among us.
But yeah, I was like, wow, that's a really interesting combination of numbers to put together. But obviously, that deeper meaning for it speaks for itself. And I
Yeah.
can't thank you enough for the great deeds that you do, the time that you take out, the lives that you have touched, and the goodness that you're spreading. So thank you so much for your time, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate hearing the things that you do.
Yeah. Really grateful to talk to you, Rashid. And, I wish I knew a little bit more about you. I looked a little bit up online about you, and you look like an interesting guy. So I wish you all the best in everything you do.
I appreciate it. That's my mind spins, and seeing, being able to. That's part of my curiosity. There's things that you always have to be thinking in life, and you always have to be fascinated. And the best thing about children is their curiosity. And for some reason, you're supposed to lose that as an adult, or it's not cool to ask questions as an adult. I had to lose. I had to say I just wanted to be a kid and figure out all the fascinating things that are around this world.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much to learn, and you're not too old to learn. I mean, I started pretty late, but I've
No,
seen people older than me going back to school and interested in it, you know. So at 53 to go back was an honor. It was great, and I enjoyed it. So since I was so interested, I got the most for my money, you know. So,
right.
but
And I
no,
thank you
thank you
so
so
much for
much
your
for having
time.
me.
Oh, no problem, no problem. I'd love to pick your brain further. You take care, and thank you for being on the Tribe podcast, sir.
Yeah, always interested to talk. You take care.
You too. Thank you.